Good morning, everyone. Let's start the new semester of AEM 341 General Microbiology. This first lecture, we will have 3 modules. We'll talk about introduction and history of microbiology. So before we see any of the slides, let's just ask yourself. So I'm going to using the whiteboard and write something there. So when we talk about microbiology, microbiology. This is actually the science of microorganism. And we'll talk about the microorganism later on. Now, what we were going to be learn is encoding, we will say basic microbiology. We'll talk a little bit about the clinical microbiology. We will mention food microbiology, a little bit water microbiology, and then we will also talk about some of the environmental microbiology. So you can say the discipline of the science of microorganism, which is encoding basic and applied. Now, what we're really going to talk, which is encoding isolation, identification, numeration, and some of the molecular methods. So let's say we're going to say PCR. You learned in the other classes. Okay, so that is the opening remarks regarding microbiology, and that is the science of microorganism. Okay. So then we go back to see the slides, what we really talk. Microbiology. In the slides, it is concerned of the study of microorganisms, that including algae, bacteria, virus, protozoan, and fungi. And the picture which is showed you is a rod-shaped bacteria. So then we have these slides. It's a little bit complicated, a lot of picture there. So before we do, I'm going to using the same thing, which is right on the whiteboard to see what we really have. Okay, so microorganism. You know, virus. Right now, because of the COVID-19, so you know virus. Everybody knows about that. So that's example. COVID-19. And then you know bacteria. That is everybody knows. Bacteria which is encoding, let's say E. coli. Okay, Salmonella. There's a recently outbreak in the pear. Okay, Salmonella. And also maybe you heard about Shigella. Okay. Then you may heard about yeast and mold. So that is called a fungi, which is encoding yeast and molds. Now, yeast usually growing at 37 degrees Celsius, molds 25 degrees Celsius. And for molds, think about you have a left rice on your bench in the dorm, then you didn't take care of it. A couple of days later, you will see that greenish cover on the surface. What is that? That is molds, okay? Then we have another thing, which is called a protozoan. like Gondia, Toxoplasma gondia, is that right? Toxoplasma gondia, which is pregnant woman should not be allowed to touch because it will cause miscarriage. And usually it's carried by the cat. So these are the things we know. Jump in your mind, you should know about all these things. Then let's go back to see the slides, what we really talk about there. So I'm stop sharing this one. Then we go back to see the slides. So in these slides, which tells you what is microorganism. Now microorganism, which means it is very small. Now here is some other things I forgot to mention. You can also draw here. We can also draw here. So this is microorganism. This micro, which means it is too small to see using naked eye. Now, what is organism? That means live bodies. And here, including when we talk about virus, so bacteria, fungi, a protozoan, and everything else. Okay, so that is microorganism. So let's look at these slides. What is microbiology? What is microorganisms? That is a cellular or acellular biological entities too small to see with naked eye. So we need to rely on a tool, which is a special tool, that is microscope. So we will talk about like light field microscope, dark field microscope, phase contrast, or laser confocal, and a little bit of introduction of the electron-analyzed microscope. Now here is what we are saying about the clarification of the microorganism. This is cellular, which means cell is a single unit, and acellular is not including a single cell. So we already mentioned a couple of them. Something else we're going to say. Fungi, including eastern modes. Bacteria, you know E. coli. So here is something about archaea. Methogens. This is responsible for most of the methane gas generated in the whole world. Now protists, including protozoan, algae, and slime modes. Now protozoan we already mentioned, like Toxoplasma gondia, that is the example. Now algae, that is responsible for 75% of the oxygen in the world. Now what is slime modes? Slime modes have two phases. One phase is protozoan, and the second phase is modes, so it's a combination. That's why it's called slime modes. Now let's look at here. We mentioned about the virus. So COVID-19 is a virus. So that is including protein and the nucleic acids. Now how about the others? We mentioned this one by one. Veloiodes, that is composed by only RNA, no DNA. This is a plant disease which has caused damage in Philippine area back in 1996. Satellites, we don't mention that too much. It's a small piece sequence of nucleic acids, often is RNA. The prions, which is composed by protein, and you should remember this stuff back in 90. Let me clear this first. So prion, which is right as PRPSC. This is called a mad cow disease. The full name called esophagus infiltratus. It's a very long name. This is in 1997, happened in Britain. and then transferred to the United States, which is a big damage for the beef industry. So even start from 2003, Russia, China, and also Australia are still forbidden all the red meat to imports from the United States because of this prion. Now, this is not a virus, not a bacteria, not a fungi. It's very special. It is a protein. Okay, so cause medical disease in the cow, then in the human being, it has caused coral disease. We'll mention that when we talk about move to the virus part later. So just give you some background about this one. So we go back to see the slides. So how we classify the microorganism? So there is a three domain, which is encoding bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Eukarya like eukaryotes. For example, E. coli is a bacteria that belongs to bacteria. And the yeast and the molds, which is eukaryotes, so it belongs to eukarya. Now, how they classify that? This is based on the 16S RNA sequencing. And they get the sample, extract the DNA around the PCR to see the genetic distance. The more closer of the genetic distance, which means they are more close from the original, from the origin, so which means they can be classified in the same group. So based on this principle, they can have bacteria, archaea, and the eukarya. So three different classifications. Now, when we talk about microorganism, we always think it's bad. Yes, it's bad. It's really bad. It's going to cause human disease. So E. coli will cause diarrhea, vomiting, and urinary tract infection. Salmonella, it's a food poisoning. Like I just mentioned, there's outbreaks, and there's often have the problem in the chicken products, eggs. Now, viruses, COVID-19, flu, hepatitis. So bacteria or microorganism is always bad. We recognize that. So we can see some more examples. Let's say the fish, the ammonia, the vibrio will cause bacterial infection in the fish. And the chlamydia, we'll see the conjunctiveness of the eye. When you see the eye has a problem, the red eye does not mean really have eye disease. It might be have the urinary tract infection, or maybe have a sexually transmitted disease, because it's related to the chlamydia. Now you see the tomato blossom end rot, that is related to the ammonia. That's a plant disease pathogen. And then last one, everybody heard about the strep throat. Streptococcus pyogenes cause strep throat. We will mention later on in the detail in our bacterial disease section of the examination too. So we talk about all the bad things for microorganism, but we really know there is some of the good things. So this is the beneficial uses of microorganism. Do you like beer? You like alcohol beverages? So beer, we have two sections. You know that it's two different types of it. It's ale and lager. So that's a fermentation from yeast. And you like wine? When you go to bar, you have a cup of wine. That is from Saccharomyces through the fermentation. And antibiotics, when we have any of the strep throat, you see the doctors, they will give you antibiotics. That is coming from the mechanism products of organism, microorganisms, and killing another microorganism. So insecticides, which killing all these ants or the insects. Now, the bottom of these things, you know, that's called the dairy products, including cheese, yogurts, and cream, sour cream. That is usually the fermentation products from a group of bacteria called the lactic acid bacteria. Okay, so be remember, when we talk about a microorganism, we always talk about bad things, but you need to remember there are lots of beneficial uses for all these microorganisms. Okay, so the first module we stop from here, and the second module we're going to talk about history of the recent microbiology world.